be the easiest.
Oh, okay.
You're recording now.
So now I'm recording.
Okay. Yeah, I see the recording.
Okay. And then to stop the recording.
We'll just end the meeting.
Yeah, at the end it'll ask you about it.
Okay.
So there you can see their names.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or you hit that again and it goes away.
Right. Okay. I've been checking in on the hello, whatever it's called, the schedule. And I just seen 2 names posted. And are those the people that are playing? Who knows?
Who knows? I don't know.
Okay. We'll just make it up as we go along.
Yeah. Whatever, that's really up to you guys.
Because I talked to a couple of colleagues, and it sounds like a couple of their classes, it was just sort of a Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, well, hi everybody. We will figure it out.
Steve, if it turns into a Q&A, you can just tell people to mute themselves and unmute themselves.
Right.
You don't have to worry about that.
Okay, yeah, I'll let them do that so I don't screw anything else up. How's everybody? Good. What time is it? I guess it's about time. Tell me where everybody is right now. I know we had sort of the big violin welcome thing earlier, but first of all, anyone that's here so far, are you planning to play for me? Do you want to play? Do you not want to play? I'm here for you. So whatever we want to do, we will do. Is there anybody that has something they'd like to play for me? No? That's okay. A Q&A kind of thing? Yes? No? Or anything else? If you have thoughts or ideas, just unmute yourself and let me know, because like I said, I haven't been able to come to any of the other classes so far. I've been swamped in some CIM stuff, so I'm not sure what you've done so far. Has anyone played in the class yet? Yeah. Okay. Good. And I think in a couple hours, Scott and I are doing an orchestral sort of seminar, and I'm not also sure if people are playing for that or if that's also just going to be a Q&A. Well, let's go ahead. Does anybody have any specific topics or questions they want to talk about? Really, anything is fair game as far as I'm concerned. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. Why don't you tell me again, sort of unmute yourself and tell me where you're from, where you are in school, a little bit more of that kind of background. Rebecca?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm from Regina, Saskatchewan.
Uh-huh.
I just finished my undergrad at McGill, and I'm starting my master's at Yale next year.
Great. Who were you with at McGill?
I was at Andrew 1.
Okay, great. Andrew's wonderful. And who will you be with at Yale?
Hyo Kong.
Great. Good. Well, I hope you're excited about that. I hope it starts.
Yeah, me too.
where all of that is. Who's it? Russell? Hi.
Hi. I'm also just, I guess, sort of graduated, but I'm also sort of continuing with Andrew at McGill.
Uh-huh.
And currently I'm in Toronto, but most of the time live in Montreal, but I'm American.
Right.
And yeah, I guess I'm between a graduate diploma and an artist diploma, so I guess the actual like school degrees are behind me, so I'm like trying to become less of a student graduate.
Right. student for life, as we say, but I understand what you mean for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's trying to find whatever my little place in the world will be.
Of course, of course. And I know you were at CC last year, right? At least last.
Yeah, for the last 2 years, but yes, last year, definitely, yeah.
That's right. And the two of you in a quartet, am I remembering correctly?
Yeah.
Great, great. Are you also sort of in the same path of school as Russell?
Yeah, basically. I just finished my master's at the Yale School of Music, and I'm going to be moving to Montreal and starting a graduate diploma with Andrew on.
Right. I remember that was sort of the flip-flop from Rebecca. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, that's good. And Camille?
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm in Quebec City right now, and that's where I'm from.
Mhm.
And I'm also a student at McGill. I did my undergrad and a graduate diploma with Violin Melançon.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm starting a master's with Andrew.
Good.
So,
Terrific.
yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, you're all, Andrew's terrific. Eloise? There you are.
I am in Denver right now, which is where I'm from. And I just finished my junior year at Harvard, and I study with Christopher Tong at NEC.
Oh, good. Great. Great. Oh, Jasper, I think you just came on, right?
I'm a violist here. I'm just observing the class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I saw your name listed, and I wasn't sure if you were playing or just listening. Just
listening. Yeah.
Oh, that's fine. I don't know. Is that sort of everybody so far? Maybe, I think. Well, great. Like I said, I hope everybody is doing okay in this crazy time. I'm here to. Don't be bashful. Are there any specific questions or even more general topics, anything like that you would like to sort of discuss, and we can have an honest, open discussion on things, whether it's auditions, whether it's what to do during this time, being productive, anything like that. Post graduation thoughts about that, and I might, of course, have some questions for you. But does anybody have any specific or general topics? Yeah, Camille.
I guess this is gonna be very general, but okay. How am I gonna formulate this? I guess I was wondering what you would say are the most important qualities a musician should have or develop when, preparing for orchestra auditions, which is such a specific skill, like playing excerpts and being, playing them as well as you can in an audition setting. So I personally consider myself more of a chamber musician at heart, in the sense, like I've done a lot of chamber music festivals, and that's what I love to do the most. And I know that for example, at school, even when we would take orchestra placement auditions, I never performed that well. And I was wondering if, you would, I know this is very vague, but if there were certain specific qualities that you would say are the most important to develop in order to be successful in that setting.
That's a good question, and we'll probably talk about. I don't know if you'll be able to come to the class later with Scott, myself. We'll probably, but we can talk about that now too, because it's never. It's an important thing. I'm sure we'll discuss that later, and I think it's going to be very advantageous, frankly, for me too, to have a sort of a discussion, not just with me, not just with a violinist, but with a conductor, a violinist and conductor with Scott, which is the best of both worlds, to also get his, you know, his thoughts on that more as from a music director perspective. But your question is a great one. Let me try to sort of also formulate my thoughts. I think one of the things you're talking about with, okay, you mentioned, you know, in school placement auditions, never feeling like it's maybe your best or things like that. Well, first of all, I mean, for me personally, I never feel like I'm not sure how great I am or was at taking auditions. I mean, I think I obviously did well enough, and I don't say that, you know, I'm not trying to be patronizing, but it's never what I felt most comfortable with at all. So I think part of that question is, okay, fine, we acknowledge that it's not our biggest comfort zone, but what do we have to do to put our best foot forward in that situation, right? How do we learn how to sort of take auditions well? I suppose there are some people that I think maybe feel almost more comfortable. For me, it seems hard to imagine, but more comfortable in that kind of situation, you know, in a competition kind of situation versus a concert situation, maybe. And I think it becomes sort of a personal thing. You know, I think that the right answer for one person is not necessarily the right answer for the other person in terms of how to sort of put yourself in that best possible position. Maybe the best way for me to answer that, because like I said, I feel like I'm sort of similar to what you're describing, is to go from my personal experience, which kind of leads me to what you first mentioned, and something that I'm particularly adamant or passionate about, which is this idea of chamber music. I know exactly what you mean when you mention your heart is sort of in chamber music, and that's maybe your comfort zone, what you perhaps love the most, where you feel like maybe you're most comfortable at your best, et cetera, et cetera. I really feel like, okay, are there some specific things that we have to think about both for auditions and then once you win your job and play in an orchestra section that are perhaps a little bit different than playing a quartet or sonata? Sure, maybe to a degree. Maybe certain dynamic things at times, et cetera, even strokes, et cetera. Yes, but I would, in my opinion, I strongly believe, and I feel very fortunate that I play, well, when we play in an orchestra that really kind of goes for this, but I think it's all chamber music. And I think that might be obvious, right? I mean, but I like to take that to an even higher level. It's 104 people on stage, but I would like to think that I don't treat it any differently. And I grant you that, of course, I'm in a principal position. So it's a bit easier, frankly, for me at times to feel like I'm playing in a quartet or a string quintet or something like that than like when I used to sit on the 8th stand inside of the first violins. I understand that. But conceptually, I really feel that it's all the same. I sort of chuckle to myself sometimes when some guest conductors, my music director never really does this, but guest conductors might come and say, let's play like chamber music, you know, and I think to myself, that's what this is from the beginning. It's just there are more people on stage. I know what the conductor is trying to get at. I understand that, but I just philosophically feel like there's no difference. So I urge everyone before I joined the orchestra here, I was in a string quartet for, well, 5 years, but a professional group, a young group, just starting out, sort of maybe kind of the ages that some of you are, just postgraduate school. It was the best teacher I ever had. And I had wonderful teachers, but I learned more about myself as a musician, about music, frankly, perhaps than anything else that I've done. And I carry that with me now, that sort of thought process for anything. There's nothing like going through that, putting yourself on display 6-7 days a week, making your own artistic decisions, learning how to of course play with other people, but be available to other people on stage, all of that thing. I have no doubt that I would have probably not won a position in the Cleveland Orchestra and then my current position in the orchestra without that experience. So maybe for you, the thought of, okay, in an orchestra audition situation, which is can be so antiseptic and, just doesn't feel always so natural. How can we figure out a way to make that as natural and as much like chamber music as possible? Okay, well, you're playing by yourself, sometimes with the stupid screen up there, 20-second, 50-second excerpts of giant pieces. For me, I am obsessive also when I teach. I teach excerpts a lot, as you can probably imagine. About, even though I'm not playing with the 100 other people on stage, I really am, actually. I think when you start to really learn repertoire so much, whether you played in the orchestra or not, and really immerse yourself in a Brahms symphony, a Beethoven symphony, Strauss tone poem, Mahler, I almost feel like every time I'm playing, I'm hearing everything else that's supposed to be playing with me. So how can you sort of create that sense of chamber music? I think it's possible to do that. And I really feel like, having heard so many auditions now, I feel like I can tell. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I feel like I can tell when someone is hearing everything else going on, rather than just being an excerpt hero, right? Just being this, great, fine, we have to play an extremely high level, without question. But you want people, when they're playing by themselves, to give you the feeling that they can play with other people. And I think that's so important. And that goes into a lot of other things that we'll probably talk about later too. Concept of sound, vibrato, concept of articulation, in a way that's really sort of a team player versus a me player. Look at this, look at this, look at this. Right? There's a whole, we can spend a week talking about those kinds of things. But maybe for yourself, when you're not feeling like an audition situation is your best moment to shine, well, maybe there's a way that we can actually sort of create that by just your mindset of, I'm going to play Mozart 39, but I'm going to play it with the, in this passage, with the flutist, or with the flute oboe, or of course the other strings. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. I guess I've always felt like excerpts and orchestra excerpts and orchestra, taking orchestra auditions is such a thing that is out of everything else, that like it's such a separate thing from what us as musicians are and what we do in general. It's like, I know that there has to be a way to really make the connection, and as you said, like feel like you're playing chamber music while you're taking the audition and even while you're practicing the excerpts and stuff. I guess it's always felt so strange in my mind that this way of getting an orchestra job, for example, is just so different from what it would be like in reality and what we're used to doing as musicians. So I guess it's always been hard for me to, I've always felt as well that I've never been someone who executes things. And I know there's a way to make it obviously musical and I mean, you have to, but it's just so much more difficult in that context. So I've always felt like it would be so difficult for me in a sense.
No, I understand. I mean, and that goes sort of to the very nature of, okay, you know, is this the best way to show if someone will be a wonderful member of an orchestra? I don't know. It's the system that we have. And really, I know that there can certainly be differences from perhaps country to country, and then even within countries, whatever. But still, in many ways, it's an audition, right? To win your spot. Whether it's 6 people on the committee or the whole orchestra on the committee or et cetera, et cetera. It's the system that we've been dealt. So I think when it comes to sort of, okay, how can we figure out how to execute, you use that term. And again, that can be a sort of a person by person thing, right? Sort of a blanket statement of, oh, you should do this and this and this. That might not be the case for you or you or you, because we're all different. It's figuring out in those most stressful situations when the heart rate is beating the most and you're by yourself and many times you can't even see anyone else in the hall. How can you sort of not fool yourself, but create a concert experience most effectively? Look, a lot of that has to do, I think, with experience, honestly, right? Just taking auditions. I think it's, and again, I know we'll talk about this later, but it's also how we prepare for that. I think sometimes when we prepare for auditions, at times we can be more effectively prepared than other times. Sort of it's, okay, figuring out, yes, I have no doubt listening to you talk, I feel like you probably have we can always raise the level of awareness, but you understand musically what's going on and you enjoy that, you relish that fact. And in an audition, you don't have those people with you. So what do you need to do in your preparation? Again, when the heart rate is beating the most, to convey that to an audience. And for me, it was I always felt a little bit, like when I got nervous or get nervous, I realized that, oh, I have a tendency in my right hand and my right arm to sort of shrink a little bit, you know, because you want to control. And in many ways, I would sometimes have to tell myself, no, make sure, get a little bit bigger, maybe think about using 2 inches of more bow. Whether I did or not, just that mental thought sometimes would help me in that kind of situation. Again, sometimes I would, and I tell my students this, and maybe it's even a visual thing for you that could help, and it might not. You can try it when you're practicing, but especially starting excerpts, right? It's such an important thing. They go by so fast. So how do you right away captivate your audience? Sometimes I imagined being conducted, like actually physically seeing the music director conducting me. Now, in my tempo and with my sense of what interpretively I wanted to show, but just so I felt like there was somebody else on stage with me with some kind of musical gesture. These things I think sometimes can help. I've had some students I talked to and that right away for a particular excerpt sort of helps them, whether it's the beginning of Brahms 4, for instance, which can be a little bit sort of touchy. Well, I tried to imagine a particular conductor or performance, just that I could already sort of feel the sound around me and see the gesture from the conductor. Things like that can sometimes, they might on the surface sound a little stupid, but I don't think they are if it helps. You know, I think that kind of thing can really help. Some of my colleagues at CC have done way more research with this about sort of visualization and all of that. Frankly, I should do more of that because we all go through stages about feeling more or less comfortable on stage. I still go through those stages, you know, but sometimes visualizing what you want, what you look like on stage, what you're trying to show. Not that that's a visual thing, I don't mean that, but just going through that process can help. Anything to try to create a real concert experience. You're absolutely right. It's such a bizarre thing. We have, of course, once you win your job, then we have the tenure process, which really, that's where what you're talking about, where you show in a genuine way. I would, you know, we all hope for, but do you understand music? Do you understand playing with other people? That kind of thing. But we have to win the job first. I know, I understand that. I guess the good news is we're all in the same boat with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great.
Good. And if we don't delve into that later, and if you're at the later thing, bring that up again, and I'll try to remember to do that too, because it's great to hear different perspectives of that, and to hear a music director's perspective of that. You know, we should take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Good questions. Other questions from people? Thoughts?
I have a sort of general-ish question. Actually, sort of about tenure. Yeah, I have actually found during all my years of festivals and school orchestra that actually your position, sitting principal second, is like for me the hardest thing. Because there's not always the main melodies, but you have to count all the time and be on top of it more so than really anyone else. I guess my biggest fear, I haven't done any orchestral auditions like for real jobs yet, but to me, like the actual audition process for whatever I have done is almost a little bit less nerve-wracking than actually, sitting there at first. And I guess the tenure aspect for me is the most nerve-wracking. I find that my heart rate just goes up so much when I'm not 100% comfortable yet with those 40 bars of rests or whatnot. And I just have a feeling that even if one day, let's say I get a job or something, or get a a trial for something, I feel like I would fall in that, because I feel like my nerves get the best of me when I'm trying to count something. So what would you suggest in that, even like just playing in a section and not visibly relying on other people, like other than just knowing the score? What do you do mentally to mitigate those moments where your heartbeat becomes louder than the pulse in your head?
No, I understand. That's a very good question. And again, you might get different answers from different people that you ask, but yeah, well, I can tell you that, and as a section leader, of course, well, no, let me backtrack for a moment. When I first joined the orchestra, like I mentioned before, I spent 4 years in the back of the first violin section, which was great. I mean, I got my initial pass through most of the standard repertoire doing that. And frankly, sitting on a part of the stage is very difficult. Even at Severance Hall, which is, an amazing place to go to work, there is a logistical difficulty with being in the back of a section. It's way harder than where I sit, in terms of just hearing the rest of the orchestra and response time and all this stuff. But I never once then, I had wonderful colleagues and section leaders that I would respond off of sitting in the section, but I never relied on anybody, or the conductor for that matter, to tell me when to play. That was my personal responsibility. Now, you have to also, when you're in the section, realize when to play and maybe when not to play in certain instances, if you know what I mean. But some of that is just sort of a feeling out and understanding that. But my point is, I always took that initiative, that even if it was, 20 measures rest in a Beethoven symphony, and I knew the piece backwards and forwards, I would count. I would have that inner clock going. Some of that, I feel like you would quickly become more comfortable with once you're in that situation, right? There's nothing like, even after a few weeks or months, you become a bit more comfortable. I remember that. I remember the nerves change in a different way, if that makes sense. You're right. There's no question that, like, my position where I am now, I love it. I love putting on different hats within a phrase, right? Sort of having the lead for a moment, whatever that means. It's all chamber music, like we said. But then quickly, with violas, with cello, with second oboe, it's a lot. With the altos and the chorus, a lot. This kind of thing. I love that. But it takes quite a bit of concentration, I have to say. I feel like I have a pretty good poker face, if you know what I mean. There are many times on stage that I don't feel great, or I'm nervous. It could be about anything. It could be that I'm nervous because I've only played this piece once, or I've never played it. It's a commissioned piece. It's tricky. Or I'm nervous because it's something I've played 80 times, but that particular night I'm just a little bit more nervous. Or the conductor for me is very inspiring and I don't want to let him or her down. All this stuff that comes into play. But I try to never show that. But my mind, I'm trying to always sort of be attuned and be aware of things. The other thing is, you mentioned knowing the score. And I know that's an obvious thing, but I can't stress that enough. Because there are times that small little things can go wrong in a performance, right? Whether it's just a miscount somewhere, or a conductor that really screws something up, and the orchestra, and I love my group that way. And that's when certain responsibilities start to happen with certain people, but boom, it is gone before you know it, and it happens. We're back together like that. That takes concentration. I have miscounted before. Not a lot. I think I don't do that very much. I've had a couple of pretty remarkable moments. I have a fantastic stand partner who is equally diligent with that. And it's amazing. You can sometimes feel each other. You don't talk about it, but there'll be an occasion where, the mind can play tricks on you. A piece inside and out. And whether it's something that you heard on stage that you hadn't heard before, maybe in a good way, like, oh, wow. Or something distracting from the audience, or anything. that can make you quickly second guess yourself. When you're sitting where I'm sitting, you can't really second guess yourself. But there are times that I can rely, if he'll see me twitch for a moment, and he knows you have this timing, this rhythm that he knows when I'm putting my violin up to play, usually timing wise and vice versa. And there'll be a couple occasions where it's just sort of like, and just a small little signal. It takes quite a bit of concentration, but I think that's a long-winded answer to your question. I think you should give yourself have a little bit more faith with that, because that gets much easier with time and with comfort with that. Yeah, it's just the very first piece I ever played as principal second was Mahler 5. And my very first day in that chair, like I said, I had been in the orchestra before 4 years, but the very first day in that chair for principal second was on 9/11. So obviously we got to the hall and then there was no rehearsals that day, maybe even for 2 days, I can't remember. But anyway, in Mahler 5, I think about this every time I play it now. On the very first page, it's either 6 or 7 bars rest, I can't remember. And there's a huge, or something like that, that probably sounded awful with this microphone, and the first violins come in a bar ahead of the second violins. But if you look at your part, you would never think that, right? And I remember, and it's easy. You see the whole string section. You see them put their violins up, but we come in a whole bar later. I don't know what Mahler's point was with that, but I even remember I knew that. I even remember that was happening. And then to show you the kind of colleagues I had, I felt this quick it was a rehearsal, but this tap on my shoulder, and I leaned back, and it was the third chair. He said, "Don't come in with the first violins." But small little things, you start to remember the repertoire, and like I said, you can cut yourself a little bit of slack. No one's perfect. We make mistakes. We come in early. We don't come in. Not so much in the concert, but in rehearsals, those things happen. Yeah. So trust yourself. Knowing the score is absolutely paramount. We know that, of course, for wind players, right? Brass players, it's one on everything they play as a solo. So we do have a comfort in numbers. But I really, honestly, I'm not trying to be a goody two-shoes or whatever. I don't take that approach. It's as if there's a microphone on the stand every time you play in the orchestra, and it's recording everything you do. And so you try to treat it as if you are by yourself, not in terms of volume, but you know what I mean, in terms of initiative. So trust yourself a little bit more with that.
Thank you.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I wanted to ask you mentioned something about that you like that role in a way because you can wear different hats. I was wondering, that kind of made me think about sort of the balance of the amount of rehearsals that you guys have and other projects that you have besides teaching. Of course, chamber music performance and just like generally feeling good, like practicing, like how does that balance end up working with such a demanding orchestra life?
Oh, that's a good question, Russell. That's something, to be honest, that with this quarantine now, it's been sort of a shock to the system a little bit. I of course, like all of us, wish that I was working now, and we're not. But if there's not even a silver lining, because there's nothing good about what we're going through right now, but I've had more time for myself in the past 3 months or whatever. And it's been difficult to stay motivated in certain ways, like all of us, I think. I don't, you know, when's our next concert? What are we playing? But that balance has been a little bit elusive for me at times in the last 15 years, I would say. I wish I had more time for myself to practice. So what I've had to do is to figure out what I need to do to stay effective, to still be playing well. The orchestra schedule is very demanding. I know when you sit there and you know, for a person that works in an office or something, you know, the amount of hours we're on stage, we're not on stage 40 hours a week, like most full-time jobs are. If we were on stage 40 hours a week, our hands would fall off after a couple of years. You wouldn't survive. So of course it's sort of like an athletic thing, right? So it's a demanding schedule also just because of the amount of repertoire that we go through. It's just mounds of repertoire. And so you feel like when there's no negotiation, you have to show up to the first rehearsal ready to go. So most of my practice time will be taken up with something like that. The teaching that I do, which I do love, you know, if you teach 10, 12, 14 hours a week, that eats in really to most of your available time. I have found that in the last few years, and I don't particularly like it, but I do a lot of chamber music, and most of that is in the summer when I have a little bit of extra time off from the orchestra, which allows for that. It's become more difficult during the year, during the concert season here, to do that, just because it kind of feels like it takes that one thing that just sort of tips everything over the edge. And you know, it's a stress that just can become a bit crazy. I'm trying to figure out how to manage that a little bit better, because I would like to come back and have a little bit more time for myself, but it's challenging. So I do feel like I have to be far more diligent and intelligent in my practicing, so that I'm using my whatever time I have, using it well, using it efficiently, so that I'm ready to go. I haven't totally figured it out yet, to be honest. I'm just being honest with you. It's a difficult thing. I also have a wonderful family, and I want to try to be a pretty good dad with some time, and I love that. But so I've actually enjoyed a little bit this quarantine time to sort of, I've always had some things that I've wanted to do. What I've done is bought a clean edition to the sonatas and partitas, and I'm almost through them all now. I'm not at performance level. I'm not going to play them for you, but going through, I teach them so much, going through and putting in my own markings now, my own thoughts about things, which I just have never really had. I do it in lessons with students, and I mark their parts, but for my own. So things like that I've enjoyed. My wife is standing here. She's probably thinking, yeah, right.
Disregard the first thing.
1 second.
Wrong. It's a picture, but he wants Indian food. I don't know what you get there.
Oh, the donors are going to love this because this is being recorded. But my son wants Indian food, and she doesn't know what he likes.
No, I don't know what you want.
He likes chicken
I know
makhani.
what he wants. What do you want?
I want the lamb with the spinach. What's that called? Saag, lamb saag.
Any vegetable thing?
No, that's good. Thank you.
That's okay for me. I was afraid to leave to go to the store. And use that
It's okay. Anyway, now I have dinner figured out before our orchestra class. But Russell, it's a balance that it sort of changes at times too. I didn't used to teach so much, but I love that. When I first joined the orchestra, I didn't teach at all really, and I felt like for 3 years, all I did week after week after week were learn a ton of notes. And it took a lot of time to do that. So now I still have to do that at times, but let's face it, after 23 years in the orchestra now, many things I've seen multiple times. So you have a little bit less time devoted for that and for other things.
Well, thank you.
You bet.
Just sort of as a follow-up to that, I'm just wondering, so I guess, yeah, it changes, of course, as you become that familiar with the literature and what you're likely to run into all the time. I mean, but if during those sorts of stages, I mean, is that, it sort of seems like it would be easy to drown in it a little bit. Was there ever, I mean, I don't know if it's this way now, but for you guys, I've heard some orchestras have a sort of part of their audition process that involves chamber music, and I know that that's often like a role that front stand players have, is to play chamber music concerts. And does that balance it out well, or do you still find that you have to sort of create your own projects to feel like a whole musician? Because there's so much more to musical life than besides just learning the notes, but you have to do that and have that level of commitment and be.
Of course, yeah. No, I mean, there's a level of preparation that just has to be there, right? But like I mentioned before, I mean, I really, yes, I think it's important to, and many people in the orchestra I play a lot of chamber music. Some sort of more seriously than others, but there's so often something going on with that, which is fantastic. It's just so good. I do some of that for sure, and I love that, and I do a lot of that in the summer. I mean, sometimes I'll have 15, 20 pieces, chamber music pieces, that I play during the summer at various festivals and all that, and that really keeps me, it makes me better at my job here at home. And I also think that my job here at home really in many ways helps me as a chamber musician, as a quartet player, or this kind of thing. I really do think it helps that. Music is music. It's just there are various, at times you have to put different hats on, like I mentioned. But like I said earlier, I really try to, every time I step on stage at Severance with the orchestra, I really try to feel like that I'm playing chamber music and that I'm playing my part. Of course, I don't hear myself in the same way that I would if it was just me playing my part, of course, but I can still hear myself, and I can keep myself honest, and I try to keep myself honest. I'm not always, we're more successful some days than other days, but trying to play in a way that it's like I'm at CC and I'm walking out on stage. I forget the name of the Packard Hall, and playing, a Mozart piano quartet or the Franck quintet or anything like that. I do try to do that. There are times, I understand what you mean about sort of feeling complete, feeling whole, all of that. We're all different that way. I think I have many imperfections, but one thing I think that that's good about my approach is that I do feel whole most of the time with that. Are there certain weeks that I can't wait for that program to be gone? Absolutely. But it doesn't change what we have to do to be committed for that week. But I very much understand what you're saying, and I think it's also a slightly different answer for everyone. But I think the good thing is if you get into an orchestra, that provides for you and things like that, and it's a scary time right now, but there are so many opportunities to play chamber music, and I think it's essential for that. It's absolutely essential for that. When I first joined the orchestra and I had more time, I did a lot of that. I actually had to sort of learn how to say no a little bit more. Not because I was some big desired thing. I don't mean that, but just so you know that you have enough time to get everything else done. But there will be opportunities for that, and I encourage you. I'm sure you'll all want to do those things because it can be. It's essential. It really is. Camille, you had another question?
Yes, I mean, unless someone else has a question, I don't want to take up too much of the time we have. Actually, I was wondering about, I know that every time I've played in orchestra and in concerts, when you play a bit of a longer piece, and often when you play a slow movement that there's a lot of held notes and things like that, I always end up hurting, like, so my back, I don't know if it's because I'm not like using my abdominals enough, but I'm not someone I've never gotten hurt. I've never had an injury. So I think I have a pretty good like setup in general, and I guess I'm pretty relaxed when I play most of the time. But whenever it comes to orchestra, I always end up like being very sore and like in the back and in the shoulders. And I was wondering if, as an orchestra musician, if you've I'm sure you've experienced that in some way, and if you had any tips on, I know everybody's different, but a way to sit or
Right. No, it's funny it's great that you asked that. Right now it's I just turned 50 years old, and I'm physically not doing great right now. I mean, I'm actually walking a lot, and I've lost 10 pounds in the last 2 months, which is great. And but I feel I'm using my body a little differently right now than I normally do. I'm spending a lot of time holding this stupid thing, and I feel like in my neck, it's been sort of an interesting thing, because I was like, why is my neck and why are my shoulders hurting? I even hurt my hand a little bit in March. It's like, well, I'm using my body differently right now than I usually do. So I've tried to be more and more aware about that. There's no question in the orchestra. It can be a kind of playing that you have to do that you're not quite used to, in terms of, yes, holding suspended long notes, playing, at least in my orchestra, remarkably softly at times, which I often can take more effort than playing loudly. Yes, that playing a lot with an inner voice, often in the same part of the bow, very much. I mean, you play a Mozart opera, or even some of the more exhausting things I play are the later Mozart symphonies, where you never stop playing, and you're playing a lot in the middle lower part of the bow. It's exhausting with that, for sure. And the first thing we think about, and it sounds like you're self-aware, which is great, is we have to make sure that we're sort of not a tight player, right? I think we all have tension somewhere in our bodies. It's just almost all of us, mere mortals like ourselves. There's going to be tension somewhere, and you have to figure out where that is and how to minimize or eliminate it. But that can creep up. There's a marathon aspect to a job like the one I have. There are people that have physical issues. It's just it's an athlete. We figure out what we need to do to minimize that, whether it's massage, which I finally have realized is not a frivolous thing. It's actually a necessary thing. Exercise, to be honest. I think I've realized, you said your abdomen or something. It sounds crazy, but the strength of our core is so important, and mine right now is awful. And I think that's why I've been dealing with some back things. I'm also 6 almost 6'5", so that doesn't help things. But the next thing I would say, which I think is extremely important and is something that you should pay attention to, is how you're sitting. And I know that's very obvious, but for all of us, I ask you to really do that. Not just how are you sitting in your chair, but the angle of the stand. When I first played principal second, we sat on the other side of the stage, the antiphonal seating with Dochnani. Franz came and he moved us back over with the first violins, which I prefer just physically. But there are times occasionally where I still have to flip back over to the other side of the stage, like when we do with Mitsuko, all Mozart piano concerti for years. And after the first rehearsal, I hurt a little bit, because it's just sort of the angle now of sort of where I'm looking at the music and where I'm looking at her, the soloist, and where I'm looking at my colleagues now is completely reversed. And so I figure out what I need to do, but my neck is a little bit more sore. It's not horrible, but I mean, that happens within the first rehearsal for me. So it makes me realize that, okay, I just need to make sure that I position myself, especially when we're looking at music, in the best possible situation with that, if that makes sense. I don't think we think about that enough, to be honest. I know that's different than suspending yourself, holding long notes, or tremolo in a Bruckner symphony or something like this. When we have certain things like that, I always try to make sure that I'm pretty grounded and that I avoid the temptation. It's harder when you get older, of sort of, when we try so hard and we're sort of at the tip a lot or playing softly, the first thing that happens, if the shoulders raise, yes, you're trying, and that just creates unnecessary tension. You're right, we're all different. We're all built differently. It's one of the fascinating things about playing the violin, I think, with students, we're all built differently. Some big hands, small hands, long arms, short arms, long neck, short neck. There are all these things that come into play, but really figuring out, and I think that comes with experience. You sit in the orchestra for a long time, you start to realize, because you don't have a choice, what you need to do to be comfortable with that. For me, one other thing that's really important, and it's tough for me because of my height, but sometimes when people see me sitting, I try to never look badly that way. But sometimes I'll have my 2 feet slightly crossed underneath the chair. When we're on tour, it really depends on the hall and the chairs. But my whole point is I try to have my knees slightly below my waist, if that's possible. For most of you, that's going to happen. For me, like right now, I'm in my studio in my house. I have a Wenger chair, a great chair that the orchestra ordered for me. So it's a good chair to practice in. But I think it's crucial to try to have my knees slightly lower than my waist, because it just eliminates so much tension in the waist and the lower back. So all of those small little things can really make a difference. Yeah. There's all this stuff about, stretching before. I see some of my colleagues really go through quite a routine of stretching before a rehearsal. Because I should do more of that, to be honest, but all that stuff can really help. I know most of that, what I just said, is kind of obvious, but I think it's true. I think it's helpful.
Yeah, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Good. Other questions from anybody? No? I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I can sit here and talk all day sort of about orchestral life and all that. Some of that I think we're going to touch on maybe a little bit later. that's probably more the audition aspect. But I urge, one of the things I think is so great about Colorado College, the festival, is sort of an emphasis. I know it's not a full orchestra size, right? It's not 34 violins, etc. But the combination of chamber music and chamber orchestra, which I just think is so great. And I urge all of you to try to, and I'm sure you naturally try to do this, but to approach, if you choose to or want to play in an orchestra, and I highly recommend it, obviously, but to have the same ideal aspect that comes with chamber music, because it's just the same thing. When George Zell, the famous Cleveland Orchestra music director from 1945 through 1970, I think, back then orchestras were not full-time, and they gradually became full-time right about the time that Mr. Zell passed away. But he created a summer program called Blossom, Kent Blossom, which still goes on. But the whole premise of, a Cleveland Orchestra summer program, the premise was it was a chamber music program. They might have done a little bit of orchestra, but it was all chamber music. And that kind of, and I think that sort of says it all, really, right? I mean, it's to create a great, perceptive, aware musician, orchestral musician. It's that, because it's no different. So the next time a conductor says, play more like chamber music, you can just sort of don't show anything, but you can laugh inside. Oh, okay, sure. I mean, that's what we should always be doing. So, any other thoughts, or? Yeah. Are you staying motivated at home? I hope, somewhat. It's difficult. It's difficult.
This festival is definitely helping that, seeing you guys every day, and it's inspiring.
Good. That's good. I know it's I think it's amazing when Sue really pushed to, okay, let's make something happen. All the faculty was right on board, ready to go. We're dying to do things too. But I think it's really fantastic that and what a slate of every day of things that you can sort of tune into, I think is just great. I'm excited because now finally I do know I have a concert in a month. So the first time it'll be 4 months of not walking on stage. There'll be no audience, but it'll be streamed the next day, and it's chamber music, which is, what I love to do most. So,
What are you playing? Are you allowed to say?
Oh yeah, no, it's in Seattle. It's at the Seattle Chamber Music Festival, which I've done now for probably 20 years. James Ennis runs it now, but it's been around for quite a while. But I'm playing Schubert A minor quartet, string quartet, which is fabulous. So beautiful. And I'm playing some Bartok duos with Alex Carr. I'm not sure which ones yet. We'll figure that out. But but at least it's a concert. I'm old fashioned. I still carry around like a date book where I write things in, and for 4 months there's been nothing. So I'm excited about that. But I hope for you all that once we get through this in the summer and all that first of all, if you're going back to school, that will indeed be happening. We're planning on that at CIM. May I suggest number 42? 40 of Bartok? Okay. I will take that under advisement. But I hope that we can all be back on stage soon, because it's tough not having that. But you'll be able to tell your children and grandkids, if you have them, about this time. Good. Well, I hope it's been helpful enough. I wasn't sure what we were going to do today, if anyone wanted to play or not play, and that's totally fine. But I think maybe I might be seeing some of you for lessons, and maybe I'll see some of you in a couple hours with Scott. And if so, think of some more questions, and is anyone playing in that class, do you know? Or is it just a Q&A kind of thing?
I think it's is it a creative class?
Yeah.
I think that's how it was described, yeah. But I'm not sure about the definitions for everything exactly.
Right. Does creative class mean not necessarily a playing class, but more just a talking?
I believe so.
Yeah.
It's never been defined, but so far I think that's what it's been, right?
Right. We're open to anything, but good. Okay, well, I hope I'll see some of you again over this Zoom, the wonders of Zoom, and then I hope I can see you in person, obviously, at some point.
Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. If a question pops into your mind later, anybody, just reach out. You won't be bothering us at all. That's what we're here for. So.
Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences.
Oh, my pleasure. Of course. All right. Well, I'll see some of you again soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Be well.